For a few days after they signed the papers, Emily didn't tell anyone. Not because she was excited and wanted to keep it private. It was nothing like that. There had been no wedding, no celebration, no family dinner, and no moment that felt beautiful enough to remember with happiness. It was only a cheap civil registration with the simplest rings they could find, done quickly and quietly, almost as if they were afraid that if they thought about it for too long, one of them would change their mind. When Emily finally told me, she didn't sound like a person who had just started a new chapter. She sounded like someone who had made a decision too big to take back and was now waiting for the consequences to reach her. She said, "We signed the papers. Ethan and I are officially married." I remember sitting there with my phone in my hand, not knowing what to say. Because I knew Emily. I knew how much she used to romanticize love when we were younger. She used to talk about marriage like it would be something warm and safe, something chosen at the right time, surrounded by people who cared about her. But this was not that. This was two young people trying to turn pressure into permanence. Emily told me she wanted to tell her mother first. And the way it happened stayed with me for a long time. That evening, her father had been arguing with her mother again. It started because of Emily leaving university in Dublin, but in that house arguments never stayed about one thing. Her father always found a way to turn one problem into a list of everything he believed was wrong with the family. He blamed Emily's mother for the way Emily had turned out. He said Emily was stubborn because of her. He said she had become emotional, ungrateful, and irresponsible because her mother had protected her too much. He said Emily had thrown away her education, embarrassed the family, and wasted opportunities that other people would have been grateful to have. When her mother tried to defend her, he became even angrier. He accused her of always taking Emily's side and told her to leave the room. Emily heard the door open, then her mother's footsteps in the hallway. A few seconds later, her bedroom door opened quietly. Her mother came in without saying anything and lay down beside her on the bed. For a while, neither of them spoke. Emily told me later that it felt strange, because in that moment she didn't see her mother only as her mother. She saw her as a woman who had been tired for many years, a woman who had spent too much of her life absorbing blame for things she could not control. Her mother stared at the ceiling and tried not to cry. Maybe that was why Emily finally said it. She whispered, "Mom, I need to tell you something." Her mother turned her head. Emily said, "Ethan and I got married." At first, her mother didn't react. She just looked at her as if she needed a few seconds to understand the words. Then she slowly sat up and asked, "What do you mean, you got married?" Emily repeated it. "We went to the registry office. We signed the papers." Her mother covered her mouth with her hand. She was shocked, and Emily could see immediately that this was not the reaction she had secretly hoped for. Then the questions came all at once. "When did this happen? Why didn't you tell me? Does your father know? Emily, what were you thinking?" Emily tried to explain herself. She said she loved Ethan. She said she couldn't keep living in that house like a prisoner. She said marriage felt like the only way her father would finally stop treating her like a child. But even as she said it, she knew part of it sounded wrong. Because she was not really describing love. She was describing escape. Her mother was hurt most of all because Emily had done it secretly. It wasn't only about Ethan. It was the fact that Emily had made one of the biggest decisions of her life and had not let her mother stand beside her for even 1 second of it. Her mother said, "You signed your life away and didn't even tell me." That sentence broke Emily. She started crying. For a moment, her mother looked like she wanted to hold her, but fear came back into her face almost immediately. She said, "Your father is going to lose his mind when he finds out." And she was right. The next day, he found out. Emily never explained that part clearly to me. Maybe she told him herself. Maybe her mother couldn't hide it. Maybe the truth simply came out because secrets in that house never stayed buried for long. But I know what happened after. Her father called Ethan to the house. From the second Ethan walked in, it was obvious that Emily's father had already decided what he thought of him. He didn't try to have a calm conversation. He didn't ask why they had done it or what their plan was. He started shouting almost immediately. He shouted about Ethan being unemployed. He shouted about him having no stable income, no real plan, and no ability to support a wife. He said Ethan had no right to marry Emily when he couldn't even take care of himself. Then he said, "You married my daughter with what? Your mother's money? Empty promises." Ethan stood there silently. And that was what hurt Emily the most. She had expected anger from her father. She had expected insults, threats, and humiliation. She had lived with that kind of pressure for years. But she had not expected Ethan to stand there and say nothing. Her father shouted at Ethan, then turned on Emily. He told her she had ruined herself. He told her she had abandoned her education for a man who couldn't even provide for her. He said she had made the most foolish decision of her life. Emily kept looking at Ethan. She wasn't waiting for him to fight her father. She wasn't expecting him to win the argument or suddenly become someone powerful and fearless. She only wanted one sentence from him, something simple that would show her she was not alone in that room. But Ethan kept his eyes down. Later, when Emily asked him why he hadn't defended her, he said, "What was I supposed to do? Start a fight with your dad?" That answer changed something in her. In Emily's mind, signing those papers was supposed to make Ethan her safe place. It was supposed to prove that they were on the same side now, against everything that had tried to control them. But in that room, she realized she was still standing alone. After that, running away stopped being only an emotional idea. It became a plan. Emily told Ethan they should move into his old family house in a nearby town. The house belonged to his mother, but nobody was living there. Ethan's parents were divorced. He didn't speak to his father anymore because, according to him, his father had treated his mother badly for years. His mother had left the country for work and sent money back whenever she could. So the house was empty. But it was far from ready. The walls were damaged, the kitchen barely worked, some rooms looked unfinished, and the bathroom needed serious repairs. There was almost no furniture, and the whole place felt abandoned. Most people would have looked at that house and seen months of work. Emily looked at it and saw a door her father couldn't open whenever he wanted. She told Ethan, "We can fix it." Ethan hated the idea from the beginning. He said he didn't know how to do repairs. He said they didn't have enough money. He said it would take too long and that he had never done anything like that before. But Emily didn't want to hear excuses anymore. This was when I first noticed how much she had changed. Emily had always been emotional and forgiving, sometimes forgiving people long after they had stopped deserving it. But after leaving Dublin, after the secret registration, after her father's reaction, and after Ethan's silence, something inside her became harder. She stopped asking gently. She started demanding. She told Ethan that if he wanted to call himself her husband, he had to start acting like one. She told him he couldn't keep living like a boy waiting for his mother to solve every problem. And when he resisted, she knew exactly where to press. She would say, "Maybe my father was right about you." And Ethan would go quiet. Then he would do what she wanted. His mother ended up paying for most of the repairs. Emily knew that, but by then she didn't care. She wanted the house finished. She wanted a place to sleep where nobody could burst into the room and shout at her. She wanted proof that leaving home had not been a mistake. So Ethan painted walls, fixed broken things, argued with Emily, called his mother for money, and complained almost every day. But eventually, the house became possible to live in. Emily told herself that was enough for the beginning. She believed that once they moved in, their real life would finally start. She believed they would become independent. She believed Ethan would change once he had responsibility. But Emily didn't understand yet that leaving one controlled house does not automatically make a person free. Sometimes the same patterns follow you. And sometimes they become even worse in a different place. The strange thing was that Emily did not become softer after they moved into Ethan's family house. I think part of me expected that once she was away from her father, she would finally breathe. I thought she would calm down, sleep more, maybe start thinking clearly again. But that didn't happen. The moment Emily got what she thought she wanted, she became even more determined to prove that she had made the right choice. And that meant forcing everything around her to look like a life. The house had to be repaired. Ethan had to become useful. Their relationship had to look serious. Their civil registration had to mean something. It didn't matter that the house still felt cold and unfinished. It didn't matter that Ethan didn't have money of his own. It didn't matter that most of the repairs were paid for by his mother, who was working in another country and sending whatever she could. Emily acted like they were building a future. But in reality, she was pushing him because she was terrified that if he did nothing, her father would be right. Ethan had never been the kind of person who liked responsibility. He could talk about plans for hours, but when it came to doing something uncomfortable, he always found a reason to delay it. He didn't want to repair the house. He didn't want to look for work. He didn't want to deal with bills, paperwork, or anything that made their life feel real. And Emily couldn't tolerate that anymore. She had left university in Dublin. She had signed legal papers with him. She had gone against her family. She had turned her whole life upside down. So every time Ethan complained, she became colder. She would stand in the half-finished kitchen, looking at peeling paint or broken cabinets, and say, "You wanted to be my husband, so start acting like one." At first, Ethan argued back. He said she was pressuring him too much. He said she had changed. He said she was becoming exactly like her father, always criticizing and never satisfied. And the worst part was that sometimes he was right. Emily was changing. She was becoming sharper, more manipulative, and more willing to use guilt as a weapon. If Ethan refused to do something, she reminded him that he had nothing without his mother's help. If he said he was tired, she told him she was tired of carrying both of them. If he said he didn't know how to fix something, she told him to learn. She knew exactly how to make him feel small. And once she learned that it worked, she kept using it. This was the part of Emily's story that she struggled to admit even later. Because it is easier to say someone hurt you than to admit that pain also turned you into someone you didn't recognize. She wasn't only a victim of the situation anymore. She was also becoming someone who controlled the room in her own way. Eventually, the house became livable enough for them to stay there properly. The walls were painted, the worst problems were fixed, and there was enough furniture to pretend they were starting from scratch. It still didn't feel like a real home, but Emily told herself that every young couple had to begin somewhere. At the same time, her father was not finished controlling her life. Before Emily left, he had forced her to apply to a university in their hometown. In his mind, that was his way of repairing the damage she had caused by leaving Dublin. He wanted her back on a respectable path. He wanted her studying again. He wanted something he could point to and say that his daughter had not completely ruined herself. Emily agreed at first, mostly because she wanted the fighting to stop. But the day she moved in with Ethan, she told her father. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't try to soften the news. She simply said she was leaving and that she would live with Ethan in the neighboring town. Her father reacted exactly how she expected him to react. He shouted, threatened, and accused her of humiliating him again. And then he brought up the car. A few weeks earlier, he had given her a car. At the time, Emily thought it was his way of making peace after everything that had happened. She wanted to believe it meant he still cared about her, even if he didn't know how to show it gently. But the second she disobeyed him, the car became another tool of control. He told her he would take it back. He said she didn't deserve it. He said if she wanted to live like an adult, she could start by giving back everything he had paid for. Emily was shaking when she told me about it, but she still left. And I think that was the moment she convinced herself she was strong. She had gone against her father. She had moved in with Ethan. She had chosen her own life. But the truth was much more complicated. Because even though she had physically left her father's house, he was still everywhere. He was in the university application he forced her to make. He was in the car he could threaten to take away. He was in her fear every time her phone rang. And soon, he would be in her workplace too. Emily got a job at the hospital in her hometown. Officially, she was hired as an accountant, even though she didn't have the proper education or experience for that position. Her father helped arrange it because he worked there too and knew the right people. At first, Emily tried to see it as a chance. She told herself that work would give her money, structure, and a reason to leave the house every morning. She wanted to believe she was becoming independent. But from the first week, The job became another nightmare. Her father would come into her office whenever he wanted. Sometimes he came with real questions. Most of the time, he came with anger. He would criticize her paperwork, her decisions, her clothes, her expression, the way she answered him, and the fact that she was still living with Ethan. He shouted loudly enough for other people to hear. At first, people pretended not to notice. Then they started whispering. Some felt sorry for her, but many judged her. They knew she had only gotten the job because of her father. They knew she had left university. They knew she had registered her marriage secretly. And in a small workplace, stories like that never stay private. Emily started feeling watched all the time. Every morning, she walked into that hospital already tense. Every time footsteps stopped near her office, her stomach tightened. Every time someone laughed in the corridor, she wondered if they were laughing about her. And the worst part was that Ethan didn't support her at all. While Emily went to work, he stayed home. He slept late. He played on his phone. He complained that the house still didn't feel comfortable. And when Emily came home exhausted, he asked why dinner wasn't ready. Sometimes he asked why the floor was dirty. Sometimes he asked why she was in a bad mood. Emily would stand there in her work clothes after a full day of being humiliated by her father and look at Ethan sitting at home like he had been the one carrying everything. At first, she tried to explain how hard it was. She told him her father had shouted at her again. She told him people at work were judging her. She told him she felt trapped from every side. But Ethan never knew what to do with her pain. He would listen for a minute, then get uncomfortable and change the subject. Sometimes he said, "Just ignore him." And slowly, Emily stopped expecting comfort from him. Instead, she started giving orders. She told him to clean. She told him to cook. She told him to find work. She told him she was tired of being married to someone who behaved like a guest in his own life. And every evening became the same cycle. Emily came home angry. Ethan felt attacked. They argued. Then they slept beside each other in a house they had fought so hard to live in, feeling more alone than they had ever felt before. And this was only the beginning. For the next few months, Emily lived in a routine that slowly drained everything out of her. Every morning, she woke up early, got ready for work, and walked to the hospital. It took her about 30 minutes. Sometimes it rained. Sometimes it was cold. Sometimes she had barely slept because she and Ethan had been arguing until late at night. But she still went. She went because they needed money. She went because someone had to pay for food, bills, and the small things that kept the house functioning. She went because even though her salary was low, it was still the only stable income they had. And Ethan stayed home. At first, he said he was still finishing things around the house. Then he said he needed to repair his old car. Then he said he was thinking about what kind of job would actually suit him. There was always a reason. But the result was the same. Emily worked. Ethan waited. And when she came home, instead of comfort, she found more expectations. He complained that she didn't cook enough. He complained that the house was messy. He complained that she was always irritated and that she made him feel useless. Emily would look at him and feel something inside her turn cold. Because she was the one being shouted at by her father at work. She was the one walking home tired. She was the one trying to stretch a small salary across a life that already felt too heavy. And still, Ethan acted like she was failing him. That was when her pressure on him became constant. She asked him about work every day. Sometimes calmly. Sometimes with anger. Sometimes in a way that sounded less like a question and more like an accusation. She would say, "Did you apply anywhere today?" Or, "So, what exactly did you do while I was at work?" Ethan hated those questions. He said she was humiliating him. He said she didn't respect him. He said she had become obsessed with money and that she didn't understand how hard it was for him. But Emily had no patience left for his excuses. She told him that being tired of life was not the same thing as carrying life. And every time she said something like that, the distance between them became bigger. Around that time, Ethan started spending more time in the garage. At first, Emily thought it was harmless. His old car had been broken for a long time, and he kept saying that if he could fix it, everything would be easier. He said he would be able to look for jobs farther away. He said he wouldn't need to depend on Emily's car. He said fixing the car gave him something useful to do. So Emily tried to be patient. But the garage slowly became a place where Ethan could disappear. He would go there for hours. He would come back smelling like oil and cigarettes, annoyed if Emily asked too many questions. Sometimes he would say he needed to clear his head. Other times he said he had been with his friend Ryan. Ryan was someone Emily never fully trusted. He owned a small sushi place about 15 kilometers from their house. He was older than Ethan by a few years and had the kind of confidence Ethan seemed to admire. He always had an opinion, always knew better, and always made Ethan feel like Emily was the problem. According to Ryan, women complained too much. According to Ryan, marriage only worked if a man didn't let his wife control him. According to Ryan, Ethan needed to stand up for himself. Emily could feel his influence almost immediately. Ethan started repeating things that didn't sound like him. He started saying Emily was trying to make him feel less than a man. He started saying she cared more about what her father thought than about him. He started saying that no matter what he did, she would never be satisfied. And Emily became furious. Because from her point of view, Ethan was not being controlled. He was being asked to do the bare minimum. They fought constantly. Some nights, the argument began with dinner. Other nights, it began with the car, the house, money, work, or Ryan. But somehow every argument ended in the same place. Emily crying from exhaustion. Ethan shutting down. Both of them saying things they would later pretend not to remember. For almost 6 months, nothing changed. Then one day, Ethan told her Ryan had offered him a job at the sushi place. He would start as a sushi cook, learning the basics in the kitchen. Emily should have been skeptical. She knew Ryan was a bad influence. She knew Ethan didn't really care about sushi. She knew this job came from the same friend who had been feeding him ideas about how unfair she was. But she was so relieved that Ethan was finally going to work that she ignored all of it. She hugged him. She told him she was proud of him. She told herself this was the beginning of something better. The restaurant was 15 kilometers away, and Ethan's car still didn't work, so he started taking Emily's car. The same car her father had given her. The same car her father had threatened to take back. The same car that still felt like a chain around her neck. Emily gave it to Ethan anyway. She walked to work while he drove to the sushi place. She told herself it was only temporary. She told herself she could handle a 30-minute walk if it meant Ethan finally had a job. She even gave him money for fuel in the beginning because he had not received his first salary yet. That was how badly she wanted him to succeed. Her life became even more exhausting, but for a short time she didn't complain. She worked at the hospital, came home on foot, cleaned the house, cooked dinner, and tried to be encouraging. And for about a week, things almost felt peaceful. Ethan came home tired but in a better mood. He talked about learning new things at work. He seemed proud when he told her he had prepared something correctly or when Ryan said he was improving. Emily watched him and allowed herself to hope. She thought maybe responsibility was finally changing him. She thought maybe all their fighting had been leading somewhere. She thought maybe if she just helped him through the beginning, he would eventually become the partner she needed. But the peace did not last. After that first week, Emily started noticing small things. Ethan began hiding his phone. Not in an obvious way at first. He would simply turn the screen down when she came near. He would take it with him to the bathroom. He would stop typing when she entered the room. Then he started coming home later. At first, he said the kitchen had been busy. Then he said Ryan needed help closing the restaurant. Then he said they had stayed after work to talk. Emily tried to believe him. She wanted to believe him. But something in his behavior felt too familiar. He became defensive before she even accused him of anything. If she asked why he was late, he sighed like she was already starting a fight. If she asked who he was texting, he said she was becoming paranoid. If she asked why Ryan needed him so much after work, he told her she didn't understand how real jobs worked. That sentence hurt her more than he probably realized. Because Emily had been working the entire time. She had been working while he slept late. She had been working while he repaired a car that never seemed to get repaired. She had been working while he complained about being pressured. And now he was speaking to her like she was the one who didn't understand responsibility. Around that time, Ryan's wife Sophie entered the story. Sophie was quieter than Ryan, but she noticed more than people expected. She helped with some paperwork for the sushi place and sometimes came by in the evenings. Emily had met her only a few times, but Sophie always seemed polite, distant, and careful with her words. One evening, Sophie called Emily. Her voice sounded uncomfortable. She said, "I don't want to get involved, but I think you should know something." Emily's stomach dropped before Sophie even finished the sentence. Sophie explained that she had overheard Ryan and Ethan talking after closing. At first, she thought it was just normal conversation. Then she heard a girl's name. Then she heard Ethan laughing. Then she heard enough to understand that they were not talking about work. They were talking about another girl. And Sophie said the one sentence that made Emily's whole body go cold. It sounded like Ethan knows her better than he should. That was when everything started again. The suspicion. The questions. The fear. The feeling that Emily had sacrificed her whole life for someone who still could not choose her properly. And this time, she was not in Dublin. She was not far away. She was living in his house, walking to work while he drove her car, giving him money for fuel, cooking his food, cleaning his rooms, and waiting for him to come home. So when she heard about that girl, something inside her did not break quietly. It turned into anger. And that anger was about to take over everything. After Sophie called her, Emily did not confront Ethan immediately. That was the surprising part. The Emily I had known before would have called him within seconds. She would have cried, asked questions, begged for an explanation, and then hated herself for sounding desperate. But this version of Emily was different. She sat at the kitchen table in that half-repaired house and waited. She told me later that she wanted to see what he would do if she said nothing. She wanted to watch him come home, look at his face, hear his voice, and decide whether he was lying before she even asked a question. That was how far the relationship had fallen. She was no longer trying to trust him. She was studying him. Ethan came home almost an hour later than he was supposed to. He walked in quietly, placed her car keys on the counter, and immediately reached for his phone when he saw Emily sitting there. She noticed everything. The way he turned the screen away from her. The way he avoided eye contact. The way he acted tired before she even spoke, as if he was preparing himself to be annoyed. Emily asked, "Who is she?" Ethan looked confused for a second, but not confused enough. That was what Emily noticed first. He didn't ask what she meant in a natural way. He froze, then performed confusion after it was already too late. He said, "What are you talking about?" Emily said, "The girl you and Ryan were talking about." His face changed. He didn't look guilty in the way she expected. He looked angry, and somehow that made it worse. He asked who had told her. Emily didn't answer. Then he said, "Was it Sophie?" The fact that he guessed immediately told Emily more than his answer ever could. She said, "So there is something to tell." Ethan started pacing around the kitchen. He said Sophie had misunderstood. He said Ryan talked too much. He said it was only a joke and that Emily was turning nothing into drama again. Then he said something that made her hands start shaking. He said, "You're always looking for a reason to ruin things." Emily stared at him. Because for months, she had been the one trying to keep things together. She had given him her car. She had walked to work. She had paid for food when he had no salary yet. She had cooked, cleaned, and defended him even when everyone around her called him useless. And now he was saying she was the one ruining things. She asked him again, "Who is she?" Finally, Ethan said her name was Mia. She worked near the sushi place. Sometimes she came in after closing. Sometimes Ryan talked to her. Sometimes Ethan joined the conversation. According to Ethan, there was nothing more to it. Emily asked why he had been hiding his phone. He said he wasn't hiding anything. She asked why he was coming home late. He said work was busy. She asked why Ryan and Sophie both seemed to know more than she did. That was when Ethan lost patience. He said, "You're acting like your father." For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. That sentence hit exactly where he knew it would hurt. Because Emily's greatest fear was becoming like the person she had spent her whole life trying to escape. Ethan knew that. He knew it because she had told him everything. She had told him about the shouting, the control, the fear, the way her father made her question every decision she made. And now Ethan was using that wound to silence her. Emily didn't cry this time. She became cold. She said, "If I'm acting like my father, maybe it's because I'm married to someone who acts like a child." Ethan left the kitchen after that. He went outside, probably to the garage, and didn't come back for hours. That night, they slept in the same bed without speaking. The next morning, Emily walked to work as usual. She told herself she would not think about Mia. She told herself she would focus on paperwork, avoid her father, and get through the day. But nothing in Emily's life stayed separate for long. Around noon, her father came into her office. He didn't knock. He never did. He walked in holding a folder and started criticizing something she had submitted earlier that week. At first, it was about numbers, signatures, and some form she had apparently filled out incorrectly. Then, within minutes, it became about her life. He said everyone in the hospital was talking. He said people knew she was living with Ethan. He said she had embarrassed him in front of colleagues who had once respected him. Emily tried to keep her voice low because the office door was partly open. She said, "Please don't do this here." That made him angrier. He told her she had no right to act humiliated now because she had created this situation herself. People in the corridor slowed down when they passed. Emily could feel them listening. Her face burned, but she kept her eyes on the desk because if she looked up, she knew she would either cry or shout back. Then he mentioned the car. He said, "If you want to live with him, give the car back." Emily looked at him. She said Ethan needed it for work. Her father laughed in a way that made her feel small. He said, "So now my car is feeding him too?" That sentence followed her for the rest of the day. Because it was true in a way Emily hated. Her father had given her the car. Ethan was using it. Emily was walking to work. And somehow every part of her life still belonged to men who made her feel trapped. When she came home that evening, Ethan was not there. At first, she thought he was still at work. Then 7 o'clock passed. Then 8. He wasn't answering properly. He sent one message saying he was with Ryan and would come later. Emily read that message again and again. She wanted to call him. She wanted to drive there, but he had her car. She wanted to ask Sophie if she knew anything, but she also didn't want to look desperate. So she waited. By the time Ethan came home, it was almost midnight. He walked in like he expected a fight. Emily asked where he had been. He said, "With Ryan." She asked if Mia had been there. He sighed and said, "I knew this was coming." And that was when Emily understood that this was going to become the new pattern. He would do something suspicious. She would ask questions. He would accuse her of being controlling. Then she would either explode or stay silent until the anger poisoned her from the inside. For the next few weeks, everything got worse. Ethan kept working at the sushi place, but the job that had seemed like a solution became another source of problems. He came home late more often. He guarded his phone more carefully. He started caring more about how he looked before work. He bought new perfume with his first salary, even though they had bills to pay. He suddenly needed clean clothes every day, but he still expected Emily to wash them. And Emily noticed every detail. She hated herself for noticing. She hated that she had become the kind of person who checked timestamps, listened for notification sounds, and counted how many times her own husband smiled at his screen. But she could not stop. One evening, she asked to see his phone. Ethan refused. He said, "If you need to check my phone, then this relationship is already dead." Emily answered, "Maybe it is." That was the first time she said something like that out loud. Ethan looked shocked, but only for a second. Then he became defensive again. He said she was impossible to live with. He said nothing he did was enough. He said she treated him like a criminal because she was miserable at work and angry at her father. Some of that was unfair. Some of it was painfully close to the truth. Emily's whole life had become pressure. Her father pressured her at work. Ethan disappointed her at home. Money was always short. Her education was unfinished. Her mother was still stuck in the same house with a man who blamed her for everything. And Emily had no place where she felt safe. So she started controlling whatever she could. She controlled the house. She controlled the money. She controlled Ethan's movements as much as he allowed her to. She asked questions that sounded like accusations because, deep down, she already believed he was guilty. And Ethan, instead of becoming more honest, became more secretive. That was what destroyed them the most. Not one dramatic confession. Not one clear betrayal she could point to and say, "This is where it ended." It was the slow, daily feeling that the person beside her was hiding pieces of his life, while still expecting her to carry the parts he didn't want to deal with. Then Sophie called again. This time, her voice was different. She sounded nervous. She said, "Emily, I'm really sorry. I didn't want to be involved in this, but I heard more." Emily sat down before she even asked what it was. Sophie said that Ryan and Ethan had been talking in the storage room after closing. She had walked in quietly to get some papers, and they didn't hear her at first. They were talking about Mia again. Only this time, it didn't sound like a joke. Ryan was telling Ethan to be careful because Emily was already suspicious. And Ethan said, "She won't leave. She has nowhere to go." When Sophie repeated those words, Emily felt something inside her go completely still. Because maybe he was right. She had left Dublin. She had damaged her relationship with her parents. She was living in his mother's house. She had a job only because of her father. Her salary was small. Her car was being used by Ethan. And the life she had fought so hard to choose had become another place where she felt trapped. For the first time, Emily didn't ask whether Ethan loved her. She asked herself something much more frightening. If he was right and she really had nowhere to go, what kind of person would she become just to survive staying? After Sophie told Emily what Ethan had said, something in her changed again. It was not the same anger she had felt before. That anger had been loud. It made her want to shout, accuse him, demand answers, and force the truth out of him even if it destroyed the room around them. This was different. This was quieter. Emily sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hand and thought about the words Sophie had repeated. She won't leave. She has nowhere to go. At first, she wanted to believe Ethan had only said it because he was trying to look confident in front of Ryan. Maybe it was just pride. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that he had described her situation perfectly. She had nowhere that felt safe. Her father's house was a place of control. Ethan's house had become a place of disappointment. Her workplace was full of whispers and humiliation. Her mother loved her, but even her mother could not protect herself. And Ethan knew all of that. That was what hurt the most. It wasn't only that he might have been talking to another girl. It was that he had looked at Emily's life, seen how trapped she felt, and used that as a reason to believe she would stay no matter what he did. For the first time in months, Emily didn't confront him immediately. She started watching. She watched what time he came home. She watched how often he checked his phone. She watched how his mood changed after certain messages. She watched how quickly he became irritated whenever she mentioned the sushi place. And the more she watched, the less she recognized the life she had created. Ethan still used her car almost every day. Emily still walked to work. She still came home tired and cooked dinner. She still cleaned the house. She still listened to him complain about how difficult his job was, even though she knew he had spent months avoiding work completely. And now, on top of everything, she had to wonder whether he was spending his evenings getting closer to someone else while she was the one making his life possible. One night, Ethan came home late again. Emily was in the kitchen, waiting for him. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the old refrigerator humming in the corner. He placed her keys on the table. She looked at them, then looked at him. She asked, "Did you say I wouldn't leave because I have nowhere to go?" Ethan froze. He didn't answer right away. That pause told her enough. Then he said, "Who told you that?" Emily didn't move. She said, "So you did say it." Ethan rubbed his face with his hands, already annoyed. He said Sophie was twisting things. He said Ryan had been joking. He said Emily always believed the worst because she wanted to be miserable. Then Emily asked, "And Mia?" Ethan's expression changed. He said, "There is nothing with Mia." Emily asked why he kept talking about her with Ryan. He said it was normal conversation. She asked why Ryan had warned him to be careful. He said Ryan was dramatic. She asked why he hid his phone. He said she made him feel like he had to. That answer made Emily laugh, but there was no humor in it. She said, "So now it's my fault you act guilty?" Ethan snapped. He told her he was tired of being interrogated. He said he finally had a job and instead of being grateful, she was trying to destroy his confidence. He said she had become cruel, controlling, and impossible to please. Emily listened to him, and for the first time, she did not rush to defend herself. Because some part of what he said was true. She had become controlling. She had become harsh. She had learned how to manipulate him because manipulation was the only tool she had seen work in her own home. But another part of what he said was a distraction. Because Ethan was using Emily's worst qualities to avoid explaining his own behavior. That was something she understood clearly in that moment. She said, "You can hate the way I ask questions, but that doesn't answer them." Ethan went silent. Then his phone lit up on the table. Emily looked down before he could grab it. The notification was from Mia. There was no message preview, only her name. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then Ethan reached for the phone. Emily grabbed it first. He shouted her name, but she had already unlocked the screen. She knew his passcode because for most of their relationship, they had acted like sharing passwords meant trust. Now it felt like evidence from another life. The messages were not as simple as Emily had feared, and somehow that made it worse. There was no single line that made everything undeniable. There was no clear confession. There were jokes, late-night messages, deleted gaps in the conversation, compliments hidden behind casual words, and the kind of closeness that people always try to explain away when they get caught. Mia had sent him pictures from work. Ethan had replied with heart emojis and comments he would never have said in front of Emily. There were messages about Ryan covering for him. There were messages about Emily being too much. And then Emily saw one message from Ethan that made her chest tighten. He had written, "I feel like I can actually breathe when I'm not at home." Emily stopped scrolling. That sentence hurt more than the flirting. Because she had destroyed her own life trying to build a home with him. She had left Dublin. She had signed papers in secret. She had stood in front of her father while Ethan stayed silent. She had pushed him, paid for him, defended him, and waited for him. And now he was telling another girl that being away from her felt like breathing. Ethan tried to take the phone from her. Emily let him. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just stood there looking at him, and the calmness scared him more than her anger ever had. He started talking quickly. He said it wasn't serious. He said Mia meant nothing. He said he had only liked the attention because Emily made him feel useless. He said nothing physical had happened. He said he was sorry, but even his apology sounded like he was still trying to protect himself. Emily asked, "How long?" He said, "It wasn't like that." She asked again, "How long?" Finally, he admitted it had started a few weeks after he began working at the sushi place. Emily nodded slowly. That meant it had started almost immediately after she gave him her car, her money for fuel, and every bit of patience she had left. She walked out of the kitchen and went into the bedroom. Ethan followed her, still talking. He told her not to make a dramatic decision. He told her they were married now. He told her people made mistakes. He told her she couldn't run back to her father because her father would only use this against her. And there it was again. The same truth he had said to Ryan, only this time he said it to her face. He was not only asking her to stay because he loved her. He was reminding her that leaving would be humiliating. Emily turned around and said, "You think I'm trapped?" Ethan said nothing. She said, "That's why you weren't afraid." He tried to deny it, but he couldn't find the right words. The next morning, Emily went to work with swollen eyes and no car. Ethan had taken it again. She walked for 30 minutes in silence, and by the time she reached the hospital, She felt like every part of her life was moving without her permission. Her father came into her office before lunch. He immediately noticed her face. For 1 second, something like concern appeared in his expression. Then it disappeared. He asked if Ethan had done something. Emily didn't answer. Her silence was enough. Her father became furious, but not in a way that comforted her. He was not angry because she was hurt. He was angry because her pain proved him right. He said, "I told you what he was." Emily looked at him and felt completely empty. Because this was the cruelest part of it. Her father had been right about Ethan in some ways, but he had been wrong in the way he treated her. Ethan had hurt her, but that did not make her father's control love. One man's failure did not make another man's cruelty justified. For the first time, Emily understood that clearly. She did not owe her father obedience because Ethan had betrayed her. And she did not owe Ethan forgiveness because her father had been worse. That evening, Emily didn't go home immediately. She sat outside the hospital for almost an hour and called her mother. When her mother answered, Emily started crying before she could speak. She said, "Mom, I think I made a mistake." There was a long silence on the line. Then her mother said softly, "Then come home for tonight. We will think tomorrow." Emily knew going back would not fix everything. She knew her father would shout. She knew people would talk. She knew Ethan would call, apologize, accuse her, and promise to change all in the same breath. But for the first time in a long time, Emily was not thinking about how to save the relationship. She was thinking about how to save herself. And maybe that was the real beginning of her leaving. Because leaving Ethan was not only about walking out of his house. It meant admitting that signing those papers had not made her free. It meant admitting that escape is not the same as independence. It meant facing her father without letting him own the lesson. It meant looking at Ethan without turning his weakness into her responsibility. And it meant accepting the hardest truth of all. Emily had spent years trying to get away from control, only to become controlled by fear, guilt, and the need to prove everyone wrong. That night, she stood up from the bench outside the hospital and started walking. She did not know where the next part of her life would lead. She only knew that the house she had fought so hard to live in no longer felt like a home. And for the first time, she was beginning to understand that maybe it never had.